Hello, welcome to another edition of Spiritual Spectrum. I'm your host, Andre Rodatis, and on this show today we're going to talk about the nature of love. To my far right I have Denver Pearson, and to my immediate right, Julio Edwards. Julio, why don't you tell the viewing audience a little about yourself?
I'm a resident of Denver and homeowner for 15 years, and play in a local rock band at night. I work for the state of Colorado in the day, and I produce this series a couple times a month for the last 6 years.
Okay. And Denver?
I'm a longtime reader of the Urantia book. I'm also a musician, songwriter, and I write songs about the Spirit and how the Spirit affects our life and love, and that's all I'm going to say about myself.
Okay. Today's topic has a lot to do with the nature of love as a universal quality. When a lot of people write about love or sing about love, they're often thinking about many different things. What are you thinking about, Denver, when you think about the nature of love? If you had to distill that quality to its essence, what would you say the nature of love is?
As far as my songwriting goes, I'm not sure that I actually sit down and think about love. It's something to me that you experience maybe, and that you manifest it in your life, and I manifest it in my songs. And hopefully, to me, ideally, that's how love affects a person. Mm-hmm. You end up living love rather than just thinking about it and talking about it. You do it.
So love for you is something that has to be lived in order to be known?
It's got to be an action. Or a desire.
Okay. Julio, what do you think of love? What's the first thing that comes to your mind, and how would you find out what the essential quality is of love? How would you define it?
I don't know if I know what the essential quality is. I think of love in terms of how my family raised me, especially my mother. I get most of my concepts of God and love from my mother, and including my kind of father concept of God. She seemed to have both a very balanced aspect of God, and I just remember a lot of tender, loving care as a kid, and I think of love very emotionally, not very intellectually.
Would it be correct, to say that would you say that most people look at love as an emotional quality or a spiritual quality? How do you think, you think of how you think love, and then oftentimes I know in my own life when I try to communicate about love to somebody, I get wrapped up in somebody else's definition of love. Do you ever have that problem, or how do you see the rest of the world viewing love? Denver.
I think the majority of the world views it as an emotional response to their environment, or an emotional response to their inner feelings about the reaction to their lives and other people in it. I don't think too many people think of it as a spiritual ideal or an intellectual thing. It's pretty emotional for most people. Not for me.
I try to think of it for myself as well as something that brings out the best in me. What do you think? Do you think most people look at it that way, as love as being an essential part of their lives, or do you think otherwise about that?
I don't know if most people actually think about love that much. In America, we tend to think of love in relationships with partners and things like that. I don't think, or maybe we love ice cream, or we love puppy dogs, or we love our car. We kind of use the word to mean like, or other things less than what love's highest definition really is. But I think, except in religious and philosophical circles, that most people don't actually think in terms of the word love. They don't. It's not a daily word that you would use in most people's vocabulary. If it were, if it were expressed and used more, then I think it would make the planet a much better place. But unfortunately, it's not. The way it's described on TV and in music, popular music, top 40 and those types of things, is a very sometimes shallow type of love. It's not a far-seeing, all-knowing type of love that actually benefits people. Sometimes the love that we think of here in our lives is sometimes a hurtful kind of love, where you help people too much maybe, and you're not really helping them in the long run, but you feel an emotional thing that you call love for them, and you don't actually think intellectually, is what I'm doing really love? In the long run, is it really going to help this person to do something for them that they can do themselves? But frequently we run with that. We stop and help somebody with a flat tire because we love people. We want to help them. There could be times, I would hate to be the person that somebody drove by, but there could be times when maybe that person needs to have a flat and realize that responsibility is having a spare tire and a jack in the car.
Mm-hmm. What would you call, if you had to use one word to describe that, what would you call that kind of a love, or that kind of non-love?
I would say far-seeing, or I'd have to think for a few minutes to come up with a good one word.
What would you call the opposite of what would actually be a loving action, in the case that, some people, I guess 12-steppers have words for...
Yeah, the popular words enable. To enable somebody is to do something for them that they can do themselves, and they would probably feel better about themselves if they did it themselves. But frequently we think we're helping people by taking away their accountability or responsibility in life and doing things for them that aren't really that necessary.
So you're saying that one kind of love is being able to do something for somebody, but then on the other hand, there's a time when you don't want to do something for that person, and that's going to be just as loving.
God helps those who help themselves?
Right.
Okay.
It's a close call. It's better to err on the side of helping someone, hopefully. But if you know more about the circumstances than just the immediate picture sets forth, you may be able to make a better long-term decision about helping someone else.
Do you think wisdom comes into play when you, for instance, maybe a parent knows when not to overlove the child, and the parent somewhat withdraws that love, or not withdraws the love, but doesn't go overboard in pampering that child, and maybe even gives a little discipline, rather than always giving in to that child whenever that child wants something?
Sure.
Well, maybe they call it tough love, but...
Well, the issue of, for instance, that comes to my mind is, the ethics problem. You have, the very simplistic one where you have somebody comes up to you on the street, someone who's, in dirty clothes and, unshaven and, clearly has not got their own home, and comes up and asks you for money. And, the question there is, do you help that individual? And if you do, why do you help that individual? And if you don't, why don't you help that individual?
It's a tough one.
I had a pretty good example of this. A friend of mine, Mel Taylor, the First Baptist Church, was walking by the main McDonald's downtown on Capitol Hill, and a bum approached him, and street person, and asked him for some money. And Mel was with a couple other clergymen, and they were kind of leaving, going from one building to another, and instead of just giving this guy some money and wondering, is he going over to Argonaut to get some really bad beer or wine, Mel actually asked his friends to hold on for a minute, and he walked the guy inside McDonald's and bought him something to eat and drink, and stayed with him a few minutes while he ate it, and then parted ways. So that's kind of a little bit more far-seeing than just giving the guy $1 because you don't have the time to discuss with him what is he going to do with it. But I'm sure we've all given money to people under those circumstances, and we probably sometimes even put a condition on it. Now, you're not going to go get any alcohol, right? And we don't really know if they did or didn't. But there, following Mel's example, I'd say there is a way, if you can spend a few minutes with someone, to actually find out what's going on. You know, are you really doing this guy the greatest possible good?
So you may also say that it's not just a matter of looking ahead to see what actually you can do for this person and making that kind of investment, but sometimes it's an added investment of time. What I guess has been described in certain literature of going the second mile. Okay. What else would you say comes in as a love substitute, as things that people look at as being loving, but may not be loving? What do you think we often confuse? I mean, to me, it's easy to get confused. I need to oftentimes just get rid of the contrasts to love in order to understand maybe a little bit better what is love as it stands apart from those qualities. What would you say, Denver?
Julio?
Well, probably materialism. There's a lot of wanting to give people things as a kind of a substitute for a time investment. I guess when you really look at love, there's a quality time involved. Spending a little bit of time with your children or with relatives or friends, or going to nursing homes or hospices and visiting the sick, or doing the kind of things Jesus and other world-renowned religious leaders would do, are the kind of things that involved a lot of their personal time. And in the modern America, we want to write a check to care. Let's send them $10 and then we won't have to deal with these people with all these problems. And you look at someone like Mother Teresa, who devoted 70 years or so of her entire life on this planet, and her whole order of nuns and several other associated orders. Nothing could buy that. There's absolutely nothing, no substitute for that. Now, there may be people with money who are able to do other things fairly equal to that on the scope of it, but the quality of a personal love, I don't think you can buy that. You can't hire a bunch of people to love somebody else.
So the people must put in a lot of themselves, and some would even say if you haven't put in all of yourself into giving, then it really isn't love, or at least it isn't the highest form of love that you can give, since love, as far as we can see, doesn't occur outside of people giving other people love. That, in other words, it's a personal quality. Would you agree with that?
I think a lot of people have a difficult time with actually personally sharing with somebody that needs help. It's almost a threat, and maybe a certain amount of uncomfortability to go out and help the homeless, or go out and take care of somebody that's in need. Maybe they have this feeling that when they give love, it's going to take something away from them. This might come from their childhood. Maybe they weren't loved as a child very much, so they're just afraid to give it away because it's not going to be replenished. So you just kind of hold on to it. Okay. Julio, anything to add to that? I'd like to just go over a list of what Theodore Isaac Rubin, in his book Real Love, what it is and how to find it, published by Continuum Press. He says, love's enemies unfortunately abound. He lists 31 of them. I won't go through all of them, but let me start by going quickly through a number of them. Jealousy, envy, possessiveness, projection, recrimination, sullen silence, suspiciousness and paranoia,
arbitrary rightness, arrogance, greed and stinginess, getting even or the need to get even, manipulation, hidden agendas, pride. Those are just some of the ones that he lists. But he also lists perfectionism, chronic, inappropriate, gratuitous criticism, hate, lies. Some of these are obvious, some of them are not so obvious. How do you see those kinds of things manifesting themselves, and what do you attribute that to? Why does a person become hateful? Why does a person become, say, fearful? These kinds of enemies of love, how do you explain that possibly coming into people's lives, people becoming that way?
Probably a lack of a balanced personality. Whether you inherited that from being around a family that wasn't very balanced and didn't provide all the nurturing and the growth aspects that are necessary at very young ages. A lot of kids from our generation on have been brought up by single parents, sometimes single working parents. We're kind of the product of a daycare age now. And people in a school or a daycare system can't really provide the things that used to be provided centuries ago. A good Jewish upbringing, let's say back in Jesus' day, was probably one of the best balanced families that a person could be in. Just as far as bringing people up in a good, nurturing home environment. There weren't all of the problems that we have today. There's always been some that will always exist, but families were very tight and very supportive of each other. And modern society tends to not support a family, society built of families as much as it used to. We want to. We have all these great ideas to try to do it, but you can't force people to live together and raise kids. And the divorce laws are simple enough to encourage a breakdown of families to some extent.
So you say that, in looking at the negative then and trying to come up with an antidote, that one of the natures of love is nurture, that one of the essential things for the growth of love is a healthy family environment. Mm-hmm. Denver?
I agree. I don't think you can come up with a better solution or a cure for love than a healthy family and healthy friends.
Okay. What of the situation that we have today, where a lot of people have not had, clearly, especially in our society, but in many societies throughout the world, it can be argued, many families have not provided that nurturing, loving, and on the other hand, that loving leadership that people need in order to thrive. They come from what we typically call, I guess, dysfunctional families. But to define that a little bit further, it's a family lacking in love. What can a person do in later adult life to overcome that kind of an early handicap in their upbringing? Or can they? Can they overcome that? Are they doomed to really not know the nature of love? What can people do?
Well, you can't go back and relive your childhood. You can't go back into your family. So you're going to have to find that somewhere else. Maybe in friends can supply a source of rejuvenation, or a church, or a 12-step program, or something like that. You're going to have to go out and find it. Also, not only finding it externally, you're going to have to come up with something inside. I think a lot of that is going to be a spiritual growth, maybe a growth, consciousness of God, that would start that healing process. And then along with that, you have friends that are very positive and loving. I think it's going to take time. It's not something that you're going to do overnight.
Well,
but I think you can clear it up.
Okay. Well, you had to bring God into it.
I had to bring God into it.
I mean, is that an essential part of a person growing up and learning how to love, or how does God play into that? How does God play into the growth of love in an individual? Is God essential?
Well, to me, God is the source of love. God is love.
But what does that mean? What does that mean to you? Really, God is the source of love. I'm playing a little bit of devil's
Sure,
advocate here, but I can hear a lot of people saying, well, God is meaningless for me. That's somebody's invention, or it's a crutch. I don't need God. But how does love grow? How does love really grow in an individual apart from having a loving family?
Well, a good communicative or a relationship that really communicates well will allow love to grow. There has to be some form of communion, in my opinion, to see love grow. Like humanists definitely know what love is. They have a good concept of the brotherhood of man. They're, as a group, not that interested in a God concept, although there are individual humanists. They range from everything. Skeptics the same way. If you feel emotionally or even intellectually that the God's concept's important to you, then you're usually making a decision on, is it a personal God or is it an impersonal God? There are some aspects of Buddhism that use an impersonal God concept, where God's more of a force or a nature thing, or he's still maybe the first force and center, but they don't look at him as a personal being, someone you can communicate with, and in some form, no matter how vague, get communications back. For me, the personal concept of God's very important. I like the way Jesus in the New Testament and the Urantia book and in several other books has a very personal relationship with God. He doesn't call God Yahweh or any of the traditional names that a lot of people like to call God. He calls him Father, Abba. And the stress of stressing the relationship of the father and son as a role model for parents. I don't think they mean father in the masculine sense as much as they mean a fraternal type of parent. Is really important, because it's kind of like, in my opinion, when you raise kids yourself and you're there to watch them grow up, at least one parent most of the time, if possible both, you are able to give something to a child that you can't get, or this child won't be able to get in any other fashion. If you drop him off at some place, a babysitter or whatever, to be watched, and he misses that nurturing communication, learning from the parents, watching the parents grow as the children grow, because most people aren't born intelligent, loving parents. They actually learn from their kids what love is about, and they usually learn what God's about from their kids. You can't really, in my opinion, know what God is all about without having raised kids. You can speculate and theorize and feel it, but you can't actually know it, to me.
So there's a mutual growth of love between parents and children in the exchange of parents giving to children, but children, in a sense, giving back by the parents receiving the experience of raising their children. And I hear you presenting something that almost as an essential part of getting to know God, if that's part of one's life. Knowing God as a parent. If you believe God as a parent, then apparently parenting is important.
Yeah.
Not to overdo parent here, but okay. A definition I've run across is love is the desire to do good to others. What does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, you're starting off with a desire, and that seems to be an internal thing. It's not an action yet. So first you have love as a desire, and then to do good becomes the action. So it's a two-part situation. To go around doing good without having any love, that isn't a loving act. That's just an act. It could be a humanitarian act. If it's an unselfish act that you're giving love to someone else or doing something good because you feel that they are your spiritual brother and sister in relationship to God, then it's through love or true love that you're doing that good.
how would you differentiate between a humanitarian act? You made that sound as though that would be something less than a purely loving act.
Not less. It's just the consciousness of the doer is different. Humanitarian would be the source of that desire is the same. If a humanitarian or a humanist is doing good and really genuinely loves people, the source of that love is really God working through that person, I feel. I mean, I don't generate the love myself. It's very difficult for me to generate love. But I know that there is a lover that lives within me that helps me to do good to others or have that desire, even if I don't do it. So the difference is someone that is conscious of the source of love is going to be more aware of maybe the long-term aspects of what he's doing, maybe a different set of values may be placed upon the act. A humanist maybe, or someone that doesn't believe in God, doing the same act, it's just for a short time. It's not something that lasts in eternity. When I get to know somebody and love them, if it's my family or friend, those loving acts are eternal. It bonds the people in eternity. So there is a difference there. Now hopefully the humanist will at some point come to the conclusion, like I did, that the source of that love is God.
You were a humanist?
Well, I was agnostic at one time, so you can call me a humanist.
Okay.
At one time.
And for you, you described this lover within you. To me, that's what does that mean? What do you mean, a lover within you?
Well, maybe you can call it the indwelling spirit, the Spirit of God indwelling within you.
Higher power.
Higher power. I just know that the true love that I have for other people, and I'm not saying it's a continuous thing or all the time. It's it seems to come from a place that isn't me. The source doesn't seem to be me. I don't generate it. I have a difficult time loving. You can ask my wife. But I do. I do have genuine love there, and I recognize it. But I recognize that the source is not something that I manufactured. Because otherwise I could manufacture all the time and I'd be doing it all the time. It's not.
An interesting part of the human condition for me is that it's difficult for me sometimes to always be loving in every situation. In traffic is the one I think that a lot of people come up with, first of all, after a long day and stuck in traffic. Yet, I regard myself as at least a somewhat loving individual. I'm certainly not a perfectly loving individual. What I'd like to do is know how to develop love more and more in my life. Are there any recipes or are there any fast fixes here with regard to the growth of love? Or are there any true and tried techniques for growing in love, in your experience?
Well, I think service and tools are two different things that you can use to learn about love. I like the saying about the more you serve someone, the more you learn to love them. I think that has a lot of truth to it, and I think it definitely applies to the higher form of love, because you may actually not like the person you're serving in the end, but you will have learned a lot about the way we conceptualize God's love, a very far-seeing, all-knowing love that that sometimes, like Denver was saying, it causes you to be disciplined and chastised occasionally. It's not always love and roses and flowers and stuff and candy. There's a lot of hard lessons to be learned through love. The other thing is tools. There are a lot of wonderful books, a lot of wonderful programs. A lot of these things are practically free, are so cheap that anyone practically could afford them. The 12-step program is one of the best programs for learning to love yourself. And once you've learned to love yourself and have some self-esteem, kind of restore the lost person inside of you, it's a lot easier to go out and try to love someone else. A lot of people go out in the world and try to love others before they've learned to love themselves. And it's kind of a shallow, hollow thing, and a lot of people can sense it. And if you remember, you and I visited the opening of the Mormon Temple several years back, and there were a lot of Christians outside with the best of intentions, trying to beat people over the head with the gospel as they were coming out, telling them they were all going to, if you were a participant of that religion, that you may not be in God's good graces. Well, most of us were just actually sightseeing visitors. We had no interest in the Mormon religion. We found it very interesting and fascinating, and a beautiful temple, a wonderful place to go visit, and it was only open for a short time. So the effect when we came out of there is I didn't feel love from those people, even though I intellectually knew that they were loving us and trying to save us in their way of thinking. Being raised Baptist myself, you know, if you remember, I got into a pretty good discussion with some guy there for about a half an hour, and I didn't feel loved by those people. Actually, I felt more loved by the people in the Mormon temple that we were visiting. So that might be an example of how you can take love and beat somebody over the head with it and actually turn them off to what you're trying to do, no matter how good your intentions are. What does that say about the road to hell is paved with the best
with good intentions? Yeah.
So there's that's just an example of how love can actually be a little bit overdone. There might have been a better way for them to get their point across. I don't know, but that's the way they chose to do it. I respect them living out their beliefs, but I don't respect anyone hanging outside of anyone else's church kind of terrorizing the people coming out.
Well, that brings to mind, you know, how often love can be attenuated, how often it can be coupled with other qualities. You know, that love can be tainted by jealousy, or, you know, in the case of a relationship, or that you know, love can have ulterior motives. You know, I think people find that all over the place, whether it be in sexual love or whether it be in how often they may make friends for ulterior motives of one kind or another. I think it's instructive to maybe look at, again, from Theodore Isaac Rubin's book, some of love's children and some of love's friends here. Productivity, praise, affection, respect, loyalty, compassion, responsibility, health, courage, sensitivity, joy, beauty, and so on, responsibility, to name just a few that he goes through. Would you agree that those are qualities that, if love is present, those things should also be present? And what else, if anything, should be present? Or what are the fruits of someone who is trying to bring more and more love into their life?
I agree with all those. I think they're all qualities and manifestations of love. One that you didn't mention is probably there is, or an aspect of love we haven't talked about is it being unconditional. And that's a very difficult thing for human beings to be or to do, is to give their love without any conditions. As a parent, you can do it sometimes. As a spouse, it's much harder. And as an enemy, it's to an enemy, it's almost impossible. Now, loving your enemy is a pretty difficult thing. Only God would come up with that kind of concept. But
well, why would you say that? Why would you say it's not so much difficult, but why do you say that love needs to be unconditional?
Well, I'm talking about the highest ideals of love would be unconditional. You know, God's love to me is unconditional love. I don't have to do anything to earn that love. It's given to me. And because of that love, I might do something. It might manifest in my life, but I don't have to buy it, and I don't have to pay for it. I don't have to earn it. It's automatically given to me. And as a good parent, you do the same thing to your child. You should. You love that child unconditionally. That child shouldn't have to beg for it and earn it or anything. It doesn't mean you don't discipline him sometimes. but you should love him unconditionally.
Okay, so could you give an example of how love can be unconditional and yet may appear to be what some people call tough love? How can tough love be unconditional? Anybody? Are we? Well, maybe it's interesting. The silence maybe is an indication how tough it is to love toughly.
I can think of an example, maybe not a good example, but where I work at, I'm kind of like a librarian, and a person came in and asked for some help one day. And I helped him minimally because state resources are at a minimum and we're not supposed to overdo it with every person. And the guy kept asking for more help, and I felt like he wasn't letting on to what the whole situation was. And although I wasn't catching on to this, he just kept asking me for more help, and I just kind of lumped him into this category of people that come in a lot of times and don't really want to do their own work and kind of feel the state should wait on them and do their work for them. Mm-hmm. As it turns out, a few minutes later, I saw the guy looking at this map, and he had his eyes all the way down on the paper, about like that, looking at it. And in a few minutes, I realized the guy was practically blind. I don't even know how he found our office. But he could see. He had partial vision. He may have been technically blind, but he could actually see. And he could read the maps from super close distance. And then I suddenly realized, well, gee, what a jerk I've been to this guy. But in another way, the guy wasn't willing to admit to me that he had a problem seeing, so maybe he had a slight problem too. If a person comes in and has an obvious handicap, most of us will go way out of our way to help them, even if they are abusing us, or if they're not. So where I work at is an example of a lot of tough love, and every customer is an individual decision of how am I going to deal with this guy. If it's a brand new person, it's a brand new decision every day. And there's usually at least 1 to 10 new people every day, and a lot of standard people have been there a lot of times. And you find over a long time that your first impressions were very wrong. And I think a lot of love is built on impressions. Most of us have never seen God. I've never seen God personally. He's never talked to me audibly or done any supernatural thing or anything like that. I have a gut feeling that he exists, and I communicate to him and kind of emotionally feel some kind of communication backwards. It's all based on a presumption that I think he's there, and that hopefully he thinks I'm here, and we're able to carry on a discussion, although I'm not getting back physical answers. I'm having to go on faith that in some way he's trying to reach me and lead me through these decisions I'm talking about making every day. And they're not much different from this one public service announcement we never did produce, but we thought about doing, where a lady is screaming through traffic on 2 wheels, and a bunch of really nice people, which probably wouldn't happen in most cities, let her in during rush hour traffic. And she's weaving and driving like a maniac, and at the end of this commercial you see her arriving at a hospital, and she has a child in the back seat who's been hurt real bad, and she's taking him in real fast. Without knowing the motives, we would think this is another one of these drivers that we get angry at. But if you know the motive of that person, everyone probably, even the hardest-hearted person on the freeway, would have let this person in. So love is also an examination of knowing the other person's feelings and communication and motives and those types of things. You can't have love by yourself, I don't think. I think it's hard to envision being on an island by yourself, and you can love yourself and respect yourself, but you need God. If God doesn't exist, you almost need an imaginary friend anyway. Most of us had those as kids. We had teddy bears or whatever. And I think even the most hard-nosed atheist would agree that people do need alter egos and do create them in times of need. the joke about there are no atheists in foxholes may not always be true, but there's a lot of atheists who wish they weren't atheists in foxholes,
Mhm.
who wish they had a reason to believe, and who really actually express a desire.
So one of the things I hear you referring to as a definition of love, or at least greater love, is applying the technique of learning how to expand your viewpoint. You may have a narrow viewpoint, again, of the person weaving through traffic, but if you expand the viewpoint, maybe they do have a legitimate need to rush. Oftentimes they don't, but maybe they do have a legitimate need to rush. Maybe giving the benefit of the doubt is part of that, is what I hear you saying oftentimes, and being less judgmental in the personal sense, while at the same time putting more focus in the personal sense is what I hear you saying, because the instance of making the decision in the office, how am I going to treat this person, seems to me that it requires more effort, it requires more attention to the person's personal needs, and that is really the essence of what it means to be loving. That love is not putting everybody into a box and stereotyping them and saying, okay, now I'm going to treat everybody this way, maybe because I've been treated this way badly, or maybe I've been treated only good up to this level, so this is going to be my way of treating people from now on. I like the idea there of treating everyone as an individual and trying to meet the needs that you see that person having. But that does, I guess, require a certain amount of perception and a certain amount of growth within oneself in order to actually be able to meet those needs of another. One has to love oneself, would you say? One has to be trying to love more and more?
Mm-hmm.
Does it take effort?
Sure.
I mean, or is it automatic? Is it an automatic thing?
It's not automatic, for sure. It does take effort. There was a thought that came to my mind while you were talking, and it'll probably leave my mind just as fast. But I'll get back to it later. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just like the idea of, we've brought up a number of terms for love. We talked about service. We've talked about the fact that there's effort involved.
Tools is the other thing.
Yeah, tools.
And various programs that are already out there kind of educating people who just missed out on love in the early part of their life. You can, to some extent, learn about love intellectually, although love is much more an emotion than it is an idea. But you can, by attending groups who actually participate in learning to love each other and themselves, you can learn, I think, to go out into the world and love other people. And a lot of people actually end up trying to love their own parents through this thing.
Hmm.
You start out realizing that you don't like yourself or your parents or whoever, and you're able to come back to that and try to make amends, maybe in older age sometimes. There's a lot of resentment between kids and parents and in certain dysfunctional families, and you don't necessarily have to go out and get an expensive therapist. Any type of therapy or any type of 12-step program, any good church or synagogue or any other religion, Buddhism or Muslim, whoever provides the type of family training, not only to help people who've missed out on it, but to actually train people as they grow up.
So part of what is implied to me in that is the idea of yes, people may participate in these programs, and these programs may, in fact, in churches, to some extent, they provide certain time-tested techniques of growing in love. I'm always left with the question, to some extent, of where did these come from? Didn't these, to some extent, come out of the growth of some individual or some group of individuals who were trying to meet the challenges of life and try to make something more of life than they found of it?
Mm-hmm.
And is that perhaps something that we're called to do in this life?
That was my point a little while ago that I forgot. I'm glad you brought it back up. As you were talking about, or you implied that the amount that we love is usually the amount that we were loved in some degree. It's very difficult for people to love if they haven't been loved. So using that as some sort of scale, guideline. What do you have to say about a person that wasn't loved, but at some point in his life, without any sort of conditioning or anything like that, he actually starts loving. He learns to love. That's something that comes from within, and that's what I'm talking about. The God teaches us that. It has to come from something other than ourselves. So we didn't teach ourselves, and someone else didn't teach that to us. We didn't learn it in our families, and you're certainly not going to learn it in the world now. So where does that come from? Where does a Mother Teresa come from? Where does a group of people in a church get their energy from?
I see what you're saying. A Mother Teresa, her mother may have loved her, or she may have had a very loving family, but were they as loving necessarily as she has become, or something, to that effect?
So what's the source of that love, is my question.
Yeah, and that brings up a very good question. For me, I have trouble imagining where that might come from, other than a super source of love, an ultimate lover, the lover I guess you were talking about, a lover within, but also a God on Paradise, or wherever you envision God, outside of you or inside of you. Julio, do you have any further insights on that?
I like to think of us, I like the concept of us being conduits of God's love. If you do not believe in God and you want to say that you're still a conduit of love, I'd have to concede some of Denver's point. There has to be another source. If you don't believe in God, you have to have some kind of framework to work with and imagine there is some source, and a lot of humanists would say it comes from within. They have their own 12-step program without a higher power, and if it helps those people recover, then it is one step forward. You can't knock it. A good or bad analogy might be a water spigot on the side of somebody's house. A guy from a country where they don't have running water visiting your house might see you turn that on and think that spigot is actually the source of the water, and have no idea the actual path that water has traveled to get there. As crude as we are, we may think that. We may think we're the source of that love. And there may be a little bit to that, in the sense that if God's really there and He is the ultimate source of love, we're allowing that love to go through us and to be passed on to other people. So by cooperating, in certain sense, I consider us to be a source.
Would you say a spigot of love?
Yeah, a spigot of love, but a spigot that can turn itself on. And see, that's probably the major difference. Our will, in conjunction with God's love, enables us to be a pretty unique contribution to the planet. There is a value to me in recognizing the source of love, but I'm sure if you talked to dozens of different religionists and non-religionists, you could get quite a lot of variety. But I think there's a general consensus that God is the source of love, because really the word God is a label. It's not really God's name. It's not really a descriptive word of who He is. I don't even really prefer that word. I prefer to use Father or my best friend or whatever. But I think it's important to us to symbolize what the source of love is. If you can think of a better word than God, then go for it. So far, no one seems to have come up with a much better word. Krishnas have a good word, Krishna being the all-attractive person. But and some of the old Hebrew names of God all have good meanings, which are really significant.
Well, that's an interesting concept. You talk about the concept of love being attractive, and that brings up the thought for me of if love is attractive, or maybe a question before that is, what makes love attractive to people? And if it were attractive, could we even say love is contagious? Is it contagious? Is it something that catches on, or is it something that's dying on this planet? Are we becoming a less loving world or a more loving world? Or is that too philosophical a question?
No, I think we're becoming a more loving world, although at times it doesn't seem like that. But I think over in the overall scheme of things, and in the long term, we are becoming more loving.
Yeah, I think maybe sometimes we take 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards, and if you're in the middle of a step backwards, which maybe America seems to be sometimes right now, it's hard to imagine love living in the ghetto, you know. But you can find it if you're really looking for it, and you can become a source or an outlet of it yourself if you desire to be. Your quote earlier, love is the concept, the desire to do good to others. That's the first step. A lot of people don't follow through with that desire, but expressing that desire is actually love to me. It is a step beyond just desiring it, but desiring is certainly the first step.
Interesting. If it's time for us to talk about our address, Spiritual Spectrum. If you're interested in writing to us about the program, you can write to us at Spiritual Spectrum. That's at 2351 Ogden Street, Denver, Colorado, 80205. And if you're interested in giving a phone call, you can call at 861-1186. I guess what's attractive for me about the notion that love might even be contagious is just the idea of progress, well, in my life, for me individually, but also for this world. I once heard it said that if love was made attractive, or if we could love others attractively, if we could try to become more attractive people, and I don't mean by that, necessarily personal beautification on the outside, but if we actually adopt or become gracious individuals, or can grow somehow that way, that love would actually, that people would be inspired to love.
So you're saying if you had the fragrance of love, people would like to smell you?
Something like that,
They would be attracted to you like a bee to a flower, something like that.
Yeah, and the question would be, what does that mean? What does that mean for love to be fragrant? What are some of the qualities that you think make love attractive to people?
Boy, that's a tough question.
I think more than anything else it would be your actions. People can't read your mind, so they don't know, they can't see love, working in your brain. So they're going to have to see it in your life. If you're being loving in your life and they can see it, and you're good at it, and it's attractive, they're going to want to know how. How do you get that? Why are you like that?
Yeah, it's certainly the fruits of your life are important. Kids aren't very moved by a one-time example, or if you do something and tell them not to do it themselves. What they see you do every day, your actual living patterns, are what influence them.
So consistency, or what somebody might call love endurance, the idea of love being an attractive quality, would you say it has anything to do with selflessness?
A lot.
Yeah. Valued selflessness, like not, kind of like not casting your pearls before swine, but actually casting your pearls before someone who's really going to do something and appreciate it. I think Jesus is a very good example of a person who half the world right now loves, although they all differ on his doctrines and dogma and the details of everything. They all genuinely love Jesus, or trying to love Jesus, and have have or are learning to love each other through that.
Well, there's an aspect of selflessness that's self-destructive, being an enabler, that kind of thing. Probably true selflessness does not do that. It doesn't deplete the lover or the giver, because it's really the essence of the nature and the spirit, and it's undepletable.
So if I had to encapsulate that comment, it's love and love wisely. But to be attractive, to some extent, people have to see that there is no ulterior motive, that you're doing it just purely to love. Well, thank you. We've, I don't know that we've covered everything that we could on love.
It's a big topic.
It seems to be quite a universal topic in the sense that love seems to be almost a pinnacle type reality. And I thank you for joining us here on Spiritual Spectrum. And please join us another time on Spiritual Spectrum here, where we'll cover a spiritual issue of interest to all of you.